today's World Insight, the science behind viral epidemics, a renowned AIDS researcher sheds some light. And no efforts spared. China pulls out all the stops to pour aid into struggling cities. Are these efforts paying off? Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Let's begin today's show with the latest on the viral epidemic in China. The number of confirmed cases nationwide has risen to 59,000, and the number of suspected cases stands at about 13,000. The death toll has jumped by over 200 over the past day to more than 1,300. Well, more than 6,000 people have recovered. The surge in confirmed cases is mainly due to a change in the criteria used to diagnose patients. Before, test kits were the only method used in confirming cases, but now clinically diagnosed cases are also included in the total. As of yesterday, Hubei province has confirmed more than 13,000 cases through clinical diagnosis.
We have confirmed and suspected cases for the novel coronavirus pneumonia. The nucleic acid tests have been used to confirm cases. But we have had a large number of suspected cases which suited clinical diagnosis. The criteria include epidemiological history, symptoms, as well as CT scans. In fact, for pneumonia cases, clinical diagnosis is most commonly used because only 20 to 30% of normal pneumonia cases have their etiology, which means most of the patients rely on clinical diagnosis. We felt that we should add clinical diagnosis as a criterion to help us improve the treatment and management of patients, including suspected cases.
For more of the latest situation of the coronavirus outbreak here in China, we are joined by a real person in the know. We are having in New York, David Ho, Director of the Aaron Diamond AIDS Research Center and also Professor of Medicine from Columbia University. Now, he has made many innovative state-of-the-art scientific contributions to the understanding and technical treatment of HIV infection. His laboratory has also been focusing on the development of vaccines against HIV-1, both in the laboratory and also in the clinic for nearly 20 years. He is certainly a big name in the circle. I'm so glad to be joined by you, Professor Ho. Thank you for taking your time. I know, particularly these days, Professor, you have very busy schedule. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ms. Tian. It's my pleasure.
Professor, let's jump directly to the first question. 15,000 cases have been confirmed during one day. That is due to the methods of diagnosis. Now, it's a combination of so-called test kit and also clinical diagnosis, mainly using CTs. Tell me more about the latest method.
Well, I think in addressing an epidemic like this one, it is appropriate to expand the definition and adapt to the situation as the outbreak evolves. So using nucleic acid testing and now other laboratory testing such as scans and clinical conditions is in general helpful in managing the outbreak. Of course, this should not be misinterpreted as a surge in the number of new infections. And it's important that that point be made clear.
But Professor Ho, I know you were very active also during the process to deal with the outbreak of SARS. At that time, test kits was also the key word. So help us to compare what's going on now at this stage in terms of testing and the big challenge of testing to then when you guys had the solution?
Well, I think, of course, there's many similarities between SARS and the current outbreak. But in terms of the test kit, I think the difference is like night and day. 17, 18 years ago when SARS broke out, the tools were rather nascent and not readily available, and therefore confirming an absolute diagnosis was very difficult, and the condition was diagnosed largely on clinical grounds, although tests were indeed developed, but it came late in the course of the epidemic. This time, I think the virus was identified very quickly, and with that information, test kits specific for this coronavirus was built very, very fast and then widely applied. And generally applied very well. So the diagnostic differences are huge, and it's a great deal of improvement compared to the past. Of course, there's still a lot more work to be done, and the tests could be refined and made easier and cheaper and linked to clinical information.
Nucleic acid, that was the kinds of test that was used earlier, the test kit, as we use the phrase test kit. But now it's scans as well and other diagnosis through clinical period. But Professor Ho, you think about the scan. If you have the patients whose lungs already shown the huge problem in the scan, that means that patient is already at the very developed stage of the disease, and the lung has been attacked for a long time. So from the earlier test kit to now also include the scan, is it really going to solve the problem? Is there really better way to do it?
I think the health authorities are just trying to be inclusive. Obviously, CT with lots of disease in the lung is not a common occurrence, is seen only in the most severe cases. But in those severe cases, the virus may have disappeared from the mouth or the pharynx, and therefore when you try to make a diagnosis with nucleic acid tests, it may be negative, yet the patient may indeed have the new viral infection. So it's just trying to be more inclusive. I think the clinical diagnosis without the CT scan actually would capture many more such patients.
What would you term as clinical diagnosis? What would be included in the so-called benchmarks of this diagnosis?
I think it would be largely fever, cough, muscle aches, in the absence of a clear explanation like influenza virus or other viruses, and particularly when there is contact with patients with known coronavirus infection.
Now, Professor Ho, we understand this is probably already the period that the mutation is going very fast. Some media report even suggest, now I'm not sure whether that is accurate or not, the fourth generation, 1, 2, 3, fourth generation of the virus is already existing in some patients as they were seeking treatment. So what kinds of situation, complicated, are we facing right here?
Well, this new coronavirus is an RNA virus, and when such viruses try to copy its genome, there are going to be mistakes made, and that's characteristic of RNA viruses. And so it is expected that as the virus grows in different patients, there will be an evolution of its nucleic acid sequences. And so changes are expected. The real central question would be whether those changes are resulting in the behavior of the virus or the aggressiveness of the virus. And so far, there are no indication that that is the case. Of course, this is something that we all need to track very carefully, because if the virus typically would like to better and better adapt to replication or growth in humans. And it has the potential to become more aggressive. But I think there's certainly no evidence of that at this point.
Earlier, it was respiratory that people have been talking about. Now, according to research done by Mr. Zhong Nanshan and his team, it is also found in human waste. Earlier, there was also media reports suggesting about it's in the blood cell as well. So it seems that pictures, once again, Professor Ho, is getting more complicated. Now, of course, all the things I mentioned earlier are still in the research period. It is not yet 100% confirmed as to how it's being transmitted, but still, it seems that it's much more complicated than earlier.
Yes, but even if we look back at some of the early clinical reports that came out of Wuhan and China CDC, those reports actually describe the presence of the virus by various detection methods in the throat, in the mouth, and some in the blood, and in a few cases where there was diarrhea, the virus was also detected there. So this is not too different from what we had seen previously with SARS. So some of that is expected. But of course, in the midst of an outbreak like this, many of these things would take time to sort out. And I'm pretty sure many clinicians and researchers in China are trying to understand all of that more fully at this point.
Let's understand a little bit better about the treatment and also even the vaccines. Professor Ho, you are an expert in that regard. There have been earlier reports suggesting one case out of Thailand which has been successfully treated as a result of a combination of flu drug and HIV drug. Now, you are the champion of the so-called cocktail treatment, which is combining different kinds of drugs together. Do you think, sir, with your decades of experience, this will be the solution?
I think time will tell, but in general, for acute viral infections, one may not need cocktail or combination therapy. It is in chronic infection that will go on for years and years, like HIV, like hepatitis C, like hepatitis B, one would need to think more about combination therapy. With regard to the report from Thailand, we should just consider that an anecdote. 98% of the patients recovered. So whether that patient recovered from the therapy or from his immune responses, we cannot tell. We do know that the flu drug does not have activity against this new coronavirus, and the HIV drug has very weak activity against coronaviruses. So I would consider that a non-helpful anecdote.
Professor Ho, you know this very well. At a healthcare crisis, there are different kinds of solutions people are struggling with. Some are for the good purpose. Others are for the bad reason or commercial reasons only. So, Professor Ho, at a time when people are desperate for solutions, and we need to provide them as fast as possible, we don't want to miss any opportunity. But on the other hand, some of those things could lead us to a dead end. So what is the best way to look at different options, Professor Ho, with efficiency?
Yes, I think rumors could hamper the control of this epidemic if they're not truth. And I think there's certainly a lot of speculation out there. I think we need to take them with caution. There's a lot of talk about existing drugs that could be applied to this infection. Yes, we need to look at all the available drugs that are already in the clinic or already approved and see if any of them have activity against this virus. That should be done. And as reported, there may be a few drugs with very weak activity, and in the absence of any solution right now, therapeutic solution, they could be tested. But they should be tested in a way that would provide informative information. And And so that should be done. But at the same time, there should be a systematic effort to look for drugs or chemicals that have already been tested but not yet licensed. And some of those may have even better activity. And that's what many research entities are doing right now, to see if we could chase down some drugs that are pretty far along in development, and if active, could be rapidly applied to help control this situation.
In that regard, I really have to ask you about this, Professor Ho. I mean, you think about the coronavirus. This is nothing new. 17 years ago, the SARS outbreak really shocked the world. And then we also have the MERS not many years ago. And now another one, this is called the COVID-19. So it seems that one after another, haven't we really learned anything? How much energy and effort and funding and support we have been putting into the research against the coronavirus outbreak?
I think, as you said, we now have had 3 major outbreaks due to coronaviruses in the last 2 decades. Surely it will come again. And so we need, as a world, we need to be well prepared for the next one. The next one may not be identical to the current virus or to the previous SARS virus or MERS virus. But we do know that this family of viruses resides in many animal species, and as human-animal contact becomes more common, that's going to result in other transmissions that could result in an epidemic. And so the world needs to be prepared, and that's why we not only need to find a therapeutic or a prophylactic solution against COVID-19, but we also need to think of strategies that would more broadly protect against this family of viruses.
But one could argue from 17 years ago, people have already put in a lot of effort into doing the research. How come at this moment we still do not have anything? Well, you could argue science does not develop as just you wish to be, but still, are there efforts being wasted during the process, thinking about what we had then, a crisis, and people jump on it, and then after that, people forget about it? How much of that is being wasted during this process, Professor Ho? Be frank with me.
Well, I think as someone who worked on SARS 17, 18 years ago, it is very frustrating to work on drugs and work on vaccine and carry to a point where things are already tested in the laboratory and some tested in animals. But once the epidemic was controlled by the summer of 2003, there was no political will. There's no governmental commitment to carry on because the epidemic is gone. And so those potential products lay waste without support to further advance them. I think the solution, in retrospect, should have been to advance a drug, a vaccine, to the point where they are tested in human beings and for safety and for certain properties of the drug or vaccine, and then wait for the next epidemic. If we had done that, some of those weapons in our arsenal could be applied to the current epidemic at least, because SARS virus and this COVID-19 have a great deal of similarities. And there's a potential those therapeutics would cross over to have better activity against the current virus.
I have 2 other questions for you. Of course, they are all very complicated questions, but some brief answer from you. Professor Ho, you are a champion of scientific collaboration between China and the United States. Now, with this coronavirus outbreak this year, are we going to see a new stage of cooperation in this regard, despite of the political difficulties that we have witnessed over the past 2 years?
Yes, the political tension notwithstanding, I think scientific collaboration is already occurring to address this epidemic. I could tell you that the response from the U.S. side is quite substantial. The federal government, represented by CDC and NIH, have mapped out a strategy. Large players like the Gates Foundation has also mapped out a strategy, and individual scientists like myself and many of my colleagues or collaborators around the country have all mobilized to contribute whatever they can. I should say the scientific capacity in China is much greater now, and many things are well underway in China by the Chinese scientists. But there are certainly in specific areas where those of us who are based in America could make a selective contribution, and that's what we're trying to do in terms of developing drugs or antibodies that could help treat this infection or block this infection.
I see. My last question for you, of course, we also see the rise of xenophobia in some societies against the Chinese. In your country, for example, against the Chinese Americans in that case. What do you make of that? I mean, you've been experiencing Cold Wars. You saw xenophobia up and down in some societies throughout the decades. What do you make of the latest? Some say it is another disease, the disease of racial discrimination. As a scientist, how do you see that? As a minority in your country, how do you see that?
Well, I certainly feel that. At Columbia University, the Chinese or Chinese American students are experiencing that from classmates and others around them. Chinatown business is 50% down here in New York when there's not a single case of COVID-19 in our area. And of course, as an AIDS investigator, I've witnessed xenophobia in a different way when people are so scared of that virus. But I should say you deal with that by education, by clarifying what is true, what is false, and with an informed public, xenophobia should go away. And to a large extent, in America, that is the transition toward HIV. And now I think we need to educate much more, and folks in the media like yourself are in a better position to address that than we individual scientists. But we certainly will do our part to help clarify.
And you are doing it right now. Thank you so much, Professor David Ho. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule of doing research related to the coronavirus outbreak in China. Really appreciate it. David Ho, professor from Columbia University, and also he is the one who has been championed the cocktail treatment therapy in terms of treating HIV/AIDS. Thank you so much, sir. You're watching World Insight. Coming up later in our program, no effort spared. China puts out all the stops to pour aid into struggling cities. Are these efforts paying off? Some answers after the break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. We're still dedicating our show today to the outbreak of coronavirus in China. We now turn to the Chinese government's efforts to contain the viral epidemic in the country, with confirmed cases approaching 60,000 on the Chinese mainland. Aid is also pouring in. As of Wednesday, tens of thousands of medics and hundreds of thousands of equipment have been sent to central China's Hubei province, ground zero regarded as of the epidemic center. More than 20,000 doctors and nurses and experts from all across China have gone to the hardest hit cities in Hubei province to support local containment efforts. On Thursday, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, Xi Jinping, approved 2,600 more medical personnel from the armed forces to be sent to Wuhan to treat confirmed cases, on top of ones that have already arrived. To ensure enough food supply for the communities under lockdown, central authorities have also earmarked 2,000 tons of frozen pork and also vegetables to be sent to Wuhan. That is a wrap-up of the latest efforts. And now I'm joined by two people in the know, shall we say. We have Professor Xue Lan, who is the Dean of Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University, and also joining us in Washington, D.C., Cheng Li, Director and Senior Fellow of the John Thornton China Center of the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is a critical time. With a lot of efforts mobilized throughout the country, whether it's about medical help or others. Mr. Li, what do you make of the latest campaign to go against the coronavirus?
Well, before answering your question, I want to convey my empathy and goodwill for China. A country is in a very difficult time. Any person in the world recognize the painstaking effort by the Chinese government and the Chinese people to fight against the virus, recognizing the resilience, responsibility, and resolution on the part of China. So you have our great respect. Now, major steps have been taken, as you just mentioned, and I just want to emphasize a few things. One, actually, the change of local leadership, which took place a day ago. I think it's very important. Certainly, there's evidence of mismanagement, number of cases of the local government. And also, the public confidence of government is in stake. So I think that move is very, very important. Time for strong local leadership is now, and certainly, Chinese central government made this very, very important move. But plus, what else you just mentioned, I hope that this will show the determination and also allocate the tremendous resources to fight the virus.
Well, having said that, though, Professor Xue, you are in China. You've been witnessing the outbreak and also the efforts against it. What do you make of the government official change for the past 24 hours, whether it is at provincial level, the provincial governor and also the party secretary of the province, Hubei, as well as those of local level at the city of Wuhan. Meanwhile, local CDCs of Wuhan have been changed as well. What do you make of these series of changes of personnel?
Well, I think this is a very timely and important decision. As Cheng has just said, that I think first of all, I think that we have to recognize the importance of both Hubei province and Wuhan in this fight with COVID-19. I think that, for example, if you count by the numbers, the number of Hubei's sort of confirmed cases are about 80% of China's total number. And Wuhan's number is about 70% of Hubei's number. So I think those two places are really the critical, for the fight with this virus. So I think a really sort of strong and capable leadership is critical to win this battle. Secondly, I think, as Cheng has just said, I think that the leadership, I think the previous leadership, has already shown their incapability in managing this crisis. And you can see that a lot of policies are just catching up. They're not able to be deployed and to be implemented in a very capable way. And the third, also, I think, as being said, I think that there were at the various sort of news conferences and so on, that you can see that the leaders themselves are not up to the expectation of the general public. So I think the general public are quite somewhat demoralized by this incapable leadership, and so the change of leadership is very timely and critical.
Right. I want to ask another thing, Professor Xue, that is, now you see whether it's from the People's Liberation Army or from a local level across China, medical workers, the top-tier medical workers, have all been assembled and sent to Wuhan in order to manage the crisis there. But that would also mean that for the cities and provinces around China, there could be a thinner layer of medical support. So how do we see, well, the outbreak is still continuing, not just in Hubei, but also could be spreading to the other places of the country? Professor Xue.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I think that certainly, I think that given the kind of sheer number in Wuhan and Hubei, I think to mobilize the support, I think it's very critical and necessary. But as you just said, that given that the doctors are poured into to Wuhan, and what about the rest of the places in China? I think first of all, I think you have to recognize China's a huge country, and with I think over the last 40 years development, I think China has already had a quite sizable of medical professions. For example, I think Chinese medical doctors, we are I think that by last account, it's over something like 3.6 million doctors nationwide, and the nurses are over 4 million nationwide. So I think what we're talking about, I think it's probably less than half of a percent being mobilized to Wuhan. So I think the concentrating in Wuhan, that's a large number. From the different localities may not be as many. I think that. So I think at the moment, I think different places can manage. But the critical thing is that we have to make sure there will not be similar outbreaks in other places. That's very critical. Very critical. If we have a few more places like Wuhan and so on, that will put a much more stress in the system.
Another thing, Dr. Li, I want to go to you about is the extreme test of coordination this time as being reflected in the managing of the outbreak. Now, it's not just a public health care crisis. It is also about logistics. It's about manufacturing of the resources and supplies. It is also about international relations. So many things have been tested all at the same time. What about this stress test for China so far?
Well, you're right. This is the things never happened before to that scope and scale. And actually, Bill Gates 5 years ago warned us. He said that it's not that so much of a system failure will be any country, including the United States. There's no such a system at all to deal with this kind of quick spread of virus. So that requires coordination at the different levels for China. It's not only just the government, but also civil society, NGOs, but also requires international cooperation. Now, this is very, very important. People in China probably read some of the editorials by Wall Street Journal. It's very nationalistic and xenophobic. But on the other hand, we should not forget that the international community is very supportive for China. There are a lot of other articles probably not well known for the readership at the moment. Some will come out very soon. My friend Joshua Ramo, the Kissinger Institute, just wrote a piece. He talked about your earthquake is our earthquake. Your virus is our virus. It's really not China's problem, but the entire world should work together. So I think that requires international collaboration, but also the change of the leadership, local leadership, appointed Ying Yong, Shanghai mayor, former Shanghai mayor, to that position, will also better coordinate. But also I noticed there's a policy in China to designate some provinces and cities connected with China, the Wuhan and the Hubei, some districts, some the county or prefects. These are all important moves for coordination. I think it's very, very important later on to learn lessons from a lack of system and in the global perspective. But for now, there's an emergency to stop the spread of virus. To a certain extent, that sometimes we should be the cautious side because the problem is not controlled yet. We still do not know much about that virus, as David Ho, also your early guest, mentioned. So I think it's very, very important to be on the cautious side, but also requires strong cooperation more than any time before within China and also beyond China.
Professor Xue, you're a public policy expert in China. You make your assessment of that point too.
Yeah, let me first of all, I think I fully agree with what Cheng has just made. And also, I would just want to add that, in dealing with crises like this, I think every time you will have some so-called a surge demand or the the surge capacity problem. In this case, I think the demand is is for the medical doctors, for medical beds, and also for the supplies like masks and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that no country will be store that many as what's being required this time. So I think what Cheng has said is really critically important. So there's a need for when crisis happens, there's a need for local mobilization, but sometimes you have to mobilize internationally. So I think that in this case, I think China's most recently has adopted the so-called paired policy of different provinces, matching up with different municipalities in Hubei province. So I think that's sort of an issue that I think we have to mobilize. I mean, we have to think about how we can actually establish such a system after we the fight is over.
Mm. Another thing is about what about from the medical perspective. Now, Professor Xue and Dr. Li, both of you know very well that China is trying to deal with the issue internationally through the help and support of the World Health Organization, WHO. How do you see the balance of, once again, of course, multilateral platforms such as the United Nations, on the other hand, the bilateral interactions to deal with the issue, and also different layers of the Chinese society approaching other different layers are matching peers in other countries directly for the support? How do you see this overall map? Dr. Li.
Well, first of all, I want to say we should, as American, we should have a sense of humility. And most of the experts on this virus or epidemics actually outside China also tend to underestimate the scope and the scale of the challenge. And I think that also you probably heard that the U.S. CDC, actually the test materials also flawed. So this is not only just happening in China, but also from the international community. So I think this actually remind us we should really have more transparency in terms of communication and more coordination rather than just separate. I think that is the lesson we can learn. But of course, that people should not be panicked. And to a certain extent, that the mortality rate is still very low, and because of the recent increase, because of the different reporting system, certainly those affected number increased dramatically. But that's actually it's right. First of all, honesty is the best policy. You do need to release all this data or this number. But in a way, it's quite scary. But I think people should not be panicked. I think that a lot of resources, we certainly know this time better than the SARS, and also there's more cooperation. And China is also much good position to fight it. I hope that with this kind of experience, this kind of things, that this time we will also come very strongly. But it takes time, and it's still not over yet. I think that the balanced view is most important.
It is very important. Seek truth from facts. Professor Xue, that seems to be critically important. Couldn't be more at this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, indeed. I think that I fully agree with what Cheng has just said. That first of all, I think there's a need, for transparency, not just in terms of research, but also for the general public, to be able to deal with, to find their own way to mitigate the risk and to protect themselves. And also, I think the transparency can also allow the medical doctors and professionals and to learn more about the characteristics of the virus, and also to find ways to treat them. And also, of course, I think for the the researchers, I think the international collaboration is critically important. I think for this time, we see that I think the Chinese CDC researchers have released very early on of the genetic findings, and then share that with the WHO, and allow the world medical professions to be able to do research on that. But I think, of course, how can we coordinate these efforts better? So I hope that after this episode is over, there could be a better way to coordinate globally in terms of the researchers and medical professions to be able to, collectively to address, serious challenges like this one.
We have learned that experience from SARS, something have been established, some mechanism as well, but whether we need to update them as a result of the latest tests, that is a question, certainly. We want to thank both of you for joining us for this very important discussion. Cheng Li from Washington, D.C., and Xue Lan in Beijing through Skype. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and be healthy, gentlemen. And that is all the time we have for today, for the live show today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Bye for now, and I'll see you tomorrow.